division in Brussels for the public administration called Brussels Environment. And so you next. And then I just want to come back with some elements of the context for Brussels. As I said, Brussels Environment is the public administration managing the environment planification. And so we have a lot of them, including, as I say, regional plan and strategy for water, for noise, for nature, for air, energy, climate, etc., but not explicitly for climate mitigation and adaptation. And so this adaptation and mitigation is included in the air, energy, climate plan. And of course is in close collaboration and in close relation with the other strategy, of course. But I should say the climate adaptation and mitigation aspect and action directly refer to the nature plan. So it's called greening of the city. And of course, it's closely linked with the water aspect. It's both aspects are closely related. But then the nature plan will, as I say, implement the action regarding mitigation. And the context is quite, well, you should know, but Brussels is quite complex in terms of we have one region and 19 different municipalities. And you can see on the map on the right side above, so we have a map of the heat island effect, for example, that has been measured recently. And so you can directly see, if you compare the two different maps, the one above and the one below, that it's closely, of course, related to the green area, the availability or the presence of green area into the city. And so the centrum of Brussels is really critical in terms of heat island aspect, for example, and in terms of pollution also. And of course, the neighborhood of Brussels is more green, and so it's more, let's say, less affected by those pressure. But what I want to say is that we will come back to the main challenge we have, but the three main challenge we will face is to, of course, to keep those green space. The slide, yes, good.
You're leaving us.
Sorry.
Yes, please
Now
proceed. Yes, okay.
it's better. Sorry, my connection sometimes is missing, so you should raise your hand so just alert me if it is occurring. So for the green spaces, for example, we just have a chart over there. So we have about 32% of the green spaces that are public, and the rest is private. So you can imagine that we have a big problem here, or a big challenge here, because we are only able to act and to make action, I mean, on the public area. And for the private area, it's much more complicated, because we need to engage with public and private stakeholder. And so we need to develop what we call Can you change the slides? Oh. Yeah, and the other challenge we have is that all what is related to greening, to green area, and especially to nature and biodiversity is quite recent. I mean, the greening of the city and the green area already exists before, since the creation of the region in 1989. But I mean, if you the layer, the nature and biodiversity layer, for example, is relatively new, and so you can imagine that we have to combine a new regulation with already existing regulation, especially urbanistic regulation. And so for us, it's not so easy to have the same languages between building developer, for example, in urban planificator, and with us as we are working for the nature and green development. So the needed some time, because it's a debate between development, demography, building development, and nature. Yes, next slide, please. And also the fact linked with the regulations, we already have some elements of regulation that are quite interesting to preserve the green area. But as you can see, it's closely linked with the regional urbanistic regulation and other soil use regulation and other things. But you can see that it's quite limited. So it's not more, for sure we should improve and further develop those regulation action, because otherwise it's, well, when you say that you have, for example, to promote landscape and biodiversity value, it doesn't mean so much. I mean, when you have a building development, for example, of a building planification, there is a few elements, a few quantitative elements, but it doesn't mean a very high ambition. I mean, so for sure we have to work closely with the urban planificator for further improving our own regulation regarding the preservation of green spaces and then optimization of nature and biodiversity into those green spaces. Yes, next slide, please. So the four main challenge we have, as I say, it's to keep those green area, but you have seen that we have about 70% of our green area that are private, and so it's really complicated to because you have building developer and building development due to the high demographic pressure that still occur. So we have a big program on that things. So we have to develop new green area. So we are developing some new green area, but you can directly imagine that the pressure is very high in terms of building development. And so we do not have so much opportunity to build new green area. So we have to play with the private sector through voluntary engagement. And we are working on that through the signature of a convention between nature and the private sector. We should preserve the protected area that are around the city because they are, of course, protected. It's natural reserve or Natura 2000 site, and we consider them as climate buffer, of course. You know, the Sonian forest, for example, is one of the biggest forests we have. It's 5,000 hectares of forests and about 1,800 hectares in on the three region, and this forest is considered, yes, as a climate buffer for the city. And as I say, we have to work with the private sector because the main green space is already existing in the Brussels region are not protected, and so we have to manage to, yes, to engage a private actor to protect them. Next slide, please. So I will just show you some action regarding the climate adaptation and mitigation we are working on. So at trans-regional and regional level, for example, we consider that, and we focus our energy and action on 4 different corridors, which are not only for climate aspect, but also for nature and biodiversity, very important, in order to bring back nature and freshness into the city through those 4 different corridors. So better managing existing green space, the creation because Brussels is not an island. So, sorry, I think my connection is again very bad. Do you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. So because I say because Brussels is not an island, so we have to connect ourselves with the other region. And that's why it's interesting to hear the other 2 regions also during this presentation. And so we have developed some synergy with them. So we have an ongoing H2020 project for building what we call a nature-based solution based on urban forestry. For boosting the climate buffer and the coming back of the forest into the city. It was in close collaboration with the Flemish region and more specifically with the municipality of Vlaams-Brabant, which is one small provinces, sorry, of Belgium. And we have also developed another project, which now is not selected, but we for sure we will try to introduce it in another call, which is which aim at developing what we call the climate buffer around the city. And it was in close collaboration again with the Flemish region. So for sure we have to build and reinforce this collaboration with other regions, because we are, for example, if we speak about the Sonian forest, we are speaking about the same forest for the three regions. Next slide, please. So at local level, as I say, we have already existing green space, but we need to manage them in order to improve, to manage them differently, in order to improve the ecosystem services that are delivered by those green spaces. Because currently our green spaces managed on a traditional way, and for sure we should optimize the way we manage them for example, nature and biodiversity, certainly ecological management, but also to improve the CO2 services, including heat island effect that those green spaces can provide. And there is a lot of work to do. Then we have to, yes, we facilitate the development of what we call the nature plan for municipality in close collaboration with our regional nature plan in order to have a coherent, way of building new green, for greening the city. So a more coherent strategy at regional level. And of course, we have, as I say, to mainstream nature and greening of the city in other private sector. So I spoke about the voluntary engagement. We have signed 4 different conventions, partners, including Brussels Mobility, for example, for greening the streets, with the school sector, with Perspective Brussels, which is one of the partners here. We have also signed a convention, for example, with the Port of Brussels, yes, to green those green water, green corridor. And so this is the kind of convention we try to build in order to, yes, again, to optimize the greening of the different private area. Yes, next slide. And then the last slide I want to present you is the, yes, the region is there for not only building regulation. As I say, I'm more supporting what we call the voluntary engagement. So try to motivate people to build pilot projects, to measure things, and then if it succeeds, then we can replicate solution to the whole sector. To do, and so you know that Brussels is an urban region, so we have a big sector, which is the building sector, and so we need to work with them. So we have developed some tools like the CBS Plus, which is tools for optimizing nature and greening of building, in building and around building. We try to develop a good ecological practice for better managing our green area in order to improve ecosystem services delivered by those green area. A lot of training, a lot of communication tools, but we need to further improve, yes, the technical criteria directly applicable for the construction sector, for example, because they say, yes, you ask me to build a green wall, but does it have any impact for the energy aspect? How can we do that? Can you provide me technical criteria directly applicable for the building company, etc.? So we need to work on that to make the greening of things better understandable by the other sector. So that was the main elements of my presentation. And sorry, I cannot go into detail in 15 minutes, but I'm happy to answer.
Okay.